humility is one of the most important qualities which you must have. Because if you are humble, if you make people realize that you are no threat to them, then people will embrace you.
Welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast, a place of learning for those who aspire to leadership excellence. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Don Sloan is the Chief Digital Officer for EmployBridge, which is the nation's largest industrial staffing company. Don has a long history of senior leadership roles in corporate America, to include C-level roles in publicly traded company. And in the spirit of full disclosure, Don and I served together during my entire close to 15 years at Kforce. Don and I worked very closely together in the IT department. He's got a wealth of experience. I learned a lot from him and made me look good on countless occasions. And before I puff his head up too much, Don, thank you so much for being here. And the intro didn't do you justice. Tell us a little bit more. What do we need to know?
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate you having me, first of all. Well, let me start with the basics. I'm originally from Central Florida, from Tampa. Spent most of my life there. And as you might know, I went to the University of South Florida, got my undergrad there, and then you might convince me to get my master's degree there as well. And since that time, in 2014, moved to Atlanta, and that's where I am today. Been married 31 years. I have 8 kids. That's right, 8 kids. So I have a lot going on at any point in time. And like you mentioned today, I am the Chief Digital Officer for EmployBridge. That role is, basically very similar to what I think most organizations would refer to as a Chief Information Officer, but it's responsible for all of our technology strategy, and execution as well. So it's a broad role. It's a similar role to what I've had in prior organizations. I've served as a CIO, as you know, in Kforce. Also, Randstad, who is one of our competitors and the largest in our industry worldwide. And I also briefly, for about a little less than 2 years, served as CIO for Goddard Systems, the parent company for Goddard Schools.
Yeah. Impressive. How long have you been with EmployBridge now?
For just over a year, about 14 months now. I started with them in January of last year.
Wow, that's amazing. So they reached out to me for a referral, to get my opinion of you, as did the last 3 companies. I need to start charging for this, Don.
I like to think of it, Mike, as I got the job in spite of your referral. But yes, I appreciate it.
Well, that's the first thing I asked him. Look, Don's not going to see what I'm saying, right? They're like, no, it's in confidence. I'm like, okay, start writing, So cool. Well, listen, you did a pretty good job of describing what you do for the company. Tell us a little bit more. Obviously, I'm from the staffing world, as are you. Most of the audience are not. Mm-hmm. What does EmployBridge, the company, do?
So staffing, to your point, I've been in staffing for over 20 years now. And industrial staffing is also referred to as blue collar staffing. So these are hourly workers. Some of them are unskilled. We have a number of unskilled positions, and then we have some that are skilled positions, like forklift driver, a welder, or, positions that require some level of certification, training, et cetera. And we today place about 70,000 people a week into these types of positions. So in essence, what we do is we find talent or employees for our clients, and likewise for our talent, for those we place on assignment, we find jobs. And so we're servicing 2 audiences at the same time and bringing them together. The way that we like to think of it is from the talent perspective, and that is we find people jobs and we make people, careers. So, it is a passion that I think most of us who have been in the industry for a long time have, and that is around, improving people's lives by helping them navigate their careers.
Yeah. So are the jobs temporary, permanent, or a mix?
The vast majority of what we do at EmployBridge would be temporary jobs.
Mm-hmm.
That said, many of our clients do roll many of our employees that we have on assignment, our talent, they will roll them into permanent positions quite often. So, that's something that we actually encourage. It's something that is a byproduct of the services that we provide. So in essence, many of the people that we place in our clients ultimately end up in permanent positions in other clients, or in positions that they eventually land through our services.
Yeah. So just a little bit of trivia. I know what you're talking about now. I've got a good feel for it. Can you tell the audience roughly plus or minus 10,000, how many paychecks does EmployBridge issue if you do weekly or biweekly? How many paychecks do you guys do a week?
About 70. We pay about 70,000 people a week on average. So it's a fairly significant volume, as you might imagine. And what makes it more significant is how many new people we pay a week. Because you have people rolling on and off of different clients at any point in time. So we literally pay hundreds of thousands of people a year, close to 500,000
of course,
a year. And that's where it gets really complex.
Are you still mailing tax forms out at the end of the year, or did you go digital?
We encourage electronic.
I'm thinking of some poor gal down there with a stamp machine, going into the tens of thousands of stamps,
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, honestly, we have to service people where they are.
Yeah, of course.
And, and that's really a bit of what we do. And so, to your point, if that's the way we need to service them, then that's what we'll do. Yeah.
So for the leaders listening to this, episode so far, Don and I are straying a bit, but what we are saying and acknowledging is Don is presiding over a very challenging, very complex IT situation, very, very demanding technology that has to work. I mean, it just has to work. People have to get paid. State and federal taxes have to come out. The recruiters get certain splits of the revenue and all. It's more than issuing a paycheck. There's probably a couple dozen tasks or queries that have to be done on that. So all I can say, Don, is at this point in my life, better you than me, buddy. Better you than me.
For what it's worth, Mike, it isn't getting any simpler. So
I hear you. Well, 8 kids. I mean, you're not retiring anytime soon.
No, I'm not.
Yes. And for the record, I think I told you after number 5, Don, have you considered taking up bowling? Yes. And you didn't listen to me, obviously. But no, you have a beautiful wife and a beautiful family. It's the all-American family, and I'm happy every time I'm on Facebook with Gretchen. And your family's just lovely, and I see them growing. Of course, I remember them as little kids, so.
Yeah, clearly my bowling game hasn't picked up very much, but that's okay. It's all good.
It's never too late to start, Don. We're going to leave it there before we get in trouble. This is a G-rated podcast. So with that, Don, let's get right into it. So if you were limited, if we were in an elevator, I didn't know who you were, I found out, what your role was. Yeah, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about leadership, but we only had 20 floors. I'm going to see you for 1 minute and never again. What if I said, Don, what's your philosophy on leadership? 1 to 3 sentences. What would you say real quick?
I would say I see leadership as a privilege that is bestowed by those who choose to follow you. And the important thing is that, as such, it's earned. It's not entitled. It's something that others choose to make you as a leader. And so from my perspective, you have to give people a reason to follow.
Yeah.
And that usually starts with trust.
Yeah.
No matter what you provide them, whatever vision you provide, whatever you stand for, whatever it is that you've given them that says, okay, believe in this, follow me. If the trust isn't there, the effectiveness as a leader won't follow. And so that's at the very basic foundation of where I start from a leadership perspective. Those are typically, the fundamentals of my philosophy. 9 times out of 10, when I have a new leader starting and coming to work for me, one of the first things I do is differentiate for them what I see as management versus what I see as leadership. Mm-hmm. And management is something I can do for you. I can give you a manager title. I can give you authority over certain areas of responsibility, and thus you can tell people what to do.
Yeah.
But you can't get out in front and get them and influence them and get them to follow you unless they choose to do so.
Yeah.
And that to me is the primary differentiator that guides my philosophy around leadership.
Yeah. Well said. So I have to ask you the timeless question that I always start off the interviews with: leaders, born or made?
Made. Definitely made.
Yeah.
That's an easy one.
Do you, I agree that they're made. I caveat that I do think there are people born with leadership aptitude, much like musical, sports, mathematics, and things mm-hmm. like that. So I believe that some people are more inclined to do it, more equipped to do it. That said, if they don't work hard at developing their leadership skills, someone without that natural talent can outwork them to the point very quickly they can greatly eclipse the natural talent guy or gal. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that?
I agree with you. First of all, the reason I say that leaders are made is, on the one hand, to your point, there are some natural leadership qualities that come along with different personality types, with different interpersonal skills, different things that don't, quite frankly, just come with, inherent personalities that people are, just born with, for instance. Mm-hmm. There's just qualities that certainly lend themselves to leadership. But if you look around in the world, there are leaders of every single size, shape, background you can imagine. You do not see one mold that makes up leaders in this world. And so, from my perspective, that might get you a head start, but it doesn't necessarily get you to the end game. And so I agree with you in a sense that leaders, if they have a passion, if they have a desire to pursue and to learn and to grow, certainly have the ability to overcome whatever challenges they might have, naturally, that aren't necessarily qualities that they've always had their entire life. It's something that, just like anything else, you can build skills for, but you have to want it at the end of the day, and if you do not have a passion for it, if it's not something, if your motivation isn't what it should be, then it's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult to ever get there.
Fair to say that I love that what you said. I agree with it all. Fair to say that to be a good leader, you at least have to like people. It's even better if you love people, but you at least have to like people.
Leadership is all about people. Mm-hmm. That's what it is at the end of the day. So if you do not, here's another way that I look at it, and this is coming from somebody who spent their career in technology. But I know this happens quite frequently outside of technology, but it's still something that is quite frequent in my area of expertise. You have individuals who perform well in technology. They are engineers, they're architects, they have very strong technical skills. They have put a lot into building up their knowledge, their experience, and they just have an aptitude for it.
Yeah.
And they make their way up through the organization. They get promoted, they move up, but they reach a point in their career where it's like they have to decide, am I going to continue to be a technologist or do I want to be a leader? And it's for many of us, it's one of the most difficult career decisions that we have to make, because most of us got into technology because we have a passion for the hands-on, the actual work that we do. We didn't get into technology because we wanted to work with people. We got into technology because we wanted to work with computers. We wanted to work with technology in different ways. And I think many leaders in technology make the decision to go into leadership for the wrong reason, because they feel that it's their only path towards career growth, continued career growth. Typically, that's not the case, but at some point in time, you still are going to be faced with that decision. And often those leaders, the ones that are the very best technologists, are not the best leaders. It's a different skill set. It's a different set of qualities. And quite frankly, many of them don't have a passion for people.
Yeah.
That's not why they got into this to begin with. And so they find themselves unhappy. They've lost their passion for what they do because they've decided to move down a path that really isn't wrapped around what has driven them to this point. Yeah. And so going back to your question around people, if you do not have a passion for people, and when I say people, I don't just mean working with people, I mean caring about people. This isn't the role for you.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to what I was saying earlier about trust. If you're going to lead people, they have to trust you. For them to trust you, they need to believe that you care about them, not just professionally, but as an individual. It starts there. And if you can't make that investment, you're going to be very limited in where you can go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well, we've touched on this a little bit. I always ask this. I literally state that leadership is a learned skill. I mean, that's pretty much been, validated by countless studies and, my experience, personal experience. It's a learned skill. I think anybody can learn leadership. In fact, I think anybody with the desire, willingness to put the reps in, study, and this great leadership laboratory that you work in every day. That's the beauty of leadership, is you don't have to wait for the game on Sunday. Or in the Marine Corps, some guys never get to combat, which is the ultimate test. They do 10, 15, 20 years, never get, and in a way they don't want to do it, but in a way they do want it, but they never get to validate that training. Mm-hmm. With leadership, you get to do it every day. And you get to try new things and lick your wounds and try again the next day if you fall short. And so I say that anybody that's willing to commit, study, and put in the reps, Don, I say they can not only become a good leader, but I think they can become a world-class leader. Not necessarily in a world-class organization. They can be a world-class level leader as far as effectiveness, trust, getting things done, developing people, if they're in charge of the mailroom, if they're in charge in the shipping department that mails out your laptops to new employees. You get my point. And so I want to see if you get my point, or do you agree with that or not? I think it's a learned skill, and how good you get as a leader you become is really, I think, limited only to your own initiative and willingness to work hard.
I agree. I would say, where I think good leaders separate themselves is in execution. And what I mean by that, I think anybody can read about leadership and can learn about leadership, and can talk about leadership. But when it comes to executing, leadership, it still comes down to what we were saying a few minutes ago about people. You know, you have to have a passion for people and leading people to, you know, and having the right motivations in the process to, you know, to bring about the right outcomes. You know, those are the things that really are at the center of the passion of a good leader. It's not just to be a leader. It's to be to lead towards outcomes, to lead people to a better place. You know, you have to have a passion for what you're leading them for. You know, and so. So yes, I do agree, but you know, I think it's important for folks to understand that it has to be more than just knowing what it takes.
Yeah.
It also has to be, you know, passion for what you're doing and the people you're doing it with.
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, this can be instructive to the students out there, you know, students of the game, so to speak, students of leadership, of which we both remain students. That is what you said is so implied to me that I didn't even mention it. And you're absolutely right. To be an effective leader, you have to have a history of good results, because we both know students who know the game, and they know it better than we do. They can cite, quote, read books, whatever the case may be, but they just don't have a reputation for execution. And at the end of the day, that leader is there to accomplish the mission. And so to be a world-class leader, there's several bullets that I have, but the first one is to be associated, have a reputation for sustained superior results, not just like this up and down, sustained superior results over multiple projects, multiple years, multiple departments, multiple companies, maybe multiple industries. And you don't necessarily have to hit all those wickets at once, but if you're a world-class leader in the mailroom, you have to be associated with running the best mailroom there is. Sustained superior results. Whatever metrics they use to measure a mailroom by, you are greatly exceeding them always, forever and ever. And more importantly, or as important, you are developing people that can do it in your absence, and that can spread that world-class DNA throughout or other organizations. So I think we're agreeing, but I'll give you the last shot at this. Anything else you'd like to add?
What you just said, Mike, you mentioned developing other leaders. My personal opinion is, if you want to be a really good leader, if you really want to be a world-class leader, surround yourself with the right people.
Yeah.
Develop them into the right people, but make sure you're surrounded by the right people.
Yeah.
I mean, once you become a leader, your effectiveness, your level of success is greatly impacted by those around you. It's no longer 100% within your control. And so make sure that you are surrounding yourself with the people that are going to be able to execute, that are going to be able to emulate the leadership style and the culture that's going to drive performance.
Yep.
And then develop them and continue to build them into, you know, their who they potentially can be as leaders themselves.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wanted to touch on something else now. Don, you've been around a long time now. You've been around so long now that, you know, I like to tell the audience, they're looking at you. When I first met you, you had hair. You know, and then you came to work for me, and now you don't have hair. Hopefully you don't blame me for that, Don. I just think it's genetics, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, Mike, it's one of many things that I lost working for you. What can I say? You know, it's just what it is.
All right, moving on. Let's. All right. So, Don, you've been around a long time. You've observed, worked with, developed, been coached by many leaders. You've seen a lot of them. So let's talk about the cream of the crop now, the top 10% of the top 10%, really good leaders, guys that, you know, at your age and mine, I want to be like them when they grow up and they're 48 years old. They're way younger than me. So the best of the best that you've observed, do they all seem to have certain traits and characteristics in common? Not all traits, or not clones, but do they seem to have a small set of qualities, traits, habits, tendencies in common?
I think, like we said before, I think what they typically have in common, is that passion for people. And one of the traits that I think goes along with that is, in my opinion, this really goes back to just observing the leaders that I have learned from in my career. There's an authenticity to them.
Yeah.
It's when you work with somebody every day, 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, years. I mean, think about it. Your colleagues are people that you spend a significant amount of time with. They know if you're authentic.
Yeah.
They know if you're giving lip service. They know if you're scratching the surface or if you really care. And the best leaders, in my opinion, have the ability to be both authentic and vulnerable in a way that builds that trust, that builds those relationships, and quite frankly, creates influence because of those relationships. And so, that to me is something that, it's something that you basically you can't fake that. You can't go through the motions of that. That's something that you have to invest in. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to what you were saying before. There are certain qualities about people that lead into being better leaders. Yeah, it's that ability to just put yourself out there. You have to be willing to give up something of yourself to earn the trust and the relationships of others. And without that willingness to do so, I think it limits your ability to grow as a leader.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you're saying music to my ears. Now, on the other side of the coin, let's face it, there are below average leaders all the way down to the other end of the spectrum of inferior, incapable leaders. And we've all worked with some on that lower end. Let's forget those for now. Let's just talk about the below average, the mediocre, what some would call weak leaders. They are not associated with, sustained superior results. In fact, they might be associated with sustained mediocre results, or unfortunately sustained substandard results. I mean, it happens. So you've observed them, worked with them, hopefully haven't worked for them. Do they also show some qualities and traits, habits, tendencies in common?
The one thing I would say tends to be a common trait, in my opinion, is that it's about them. It's at the end of the day, regardless of what you're trying to accomplish, what the mission is, whatever, it's about them. It's about what's going to be best for them, for their career, for what they're going to get out of this coming out the other end. It's self-centered. Yeah. A leader cannot be effective with a self-centered view of the role of the organization, of the view, and of the outcomes.
Yeah.
And so, that view, that self-centered view of the world, I think, is something that has a tendency to hinder anybody who wants to have that, really wants to excel as a leader, because unfortunately, people will see right through that. It may take some time, but they will, and you'll lose trust. But even more important, the cultural implications of that type of leadership permeate throughout an organization. It has a detrimental effect to the overall performance in most situations, because if a leader is self-centered, if a leader is out to get what's best for them, their leaders are going to be the same way.
Yeah.
And their teams are going to be the same way. And that doesn't make for a strong team. It doesn't make for a strong overall performance. It certainly doesn't make for a good place to work.
Yes. Well, I love what you said. And, I know you're familiar with that cheat sheet I used to hand out called Etor's Rules. And number one, the leader serves those being led, not vice versa. And so it is all about the people that we are entrusted with and privileged to lead. So I love what you're saying. You mentioned the word trust, which, is so important to me that I actually titled my book, Trust-Based Leadership. Because, as you know, Don, you could have character, integrity. Those are just a given. You could be technically a wizard. You could be really know what you're doing leadership-wise and have the best of intentions. But if you don't trust people, they're not going to trust you. And if you don't have a climate, a culture of trust, you will never, you might do okay, but you'll never wring out maximum value from that organization. And I know you believe that and practice that. So I'm going to let you talk about trust now. What's it mean to you? And more importantly, to the aspiring and developing leaders out there, how do you personally, how have you been able to show people that you trust them, still supervise them, trust, but verify, so to speak. But how do you develop your cultures of trust in the organizations and teams that you've led? Because you've obviously done it and done it well.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have to focus on relationships. At the end of the day, it goes like I was saying before. When you invest in people, you're investing in building those relationships that are beyond what you're asking them to do today, beyond what they're going to do for you as an employee. It has to be about, personal relationship and a professional relationship in the sense that they have to feel like you care about them as an individual and not just what they can do for you. I mentioned a little bit earlier about, making yourself somewhat vulnerable. The fact is that most people who work for me know quite a bit about me, not just what I do when I walk in the door at work, but they know a bit about me personally because I share with them.
Yeah.
That I want them to know who I am, what's important to me, and I want to know what's important to them. And I want to make sure that they know that if it's important to them, it's important to me. Because that's going back to trust. That's what builds trust. If the people you work with know that, this person cares about me as an individual, and they're not going to take advantage of me. They're not going to do anything that is so self-centered that it hurts the people around them.
Yeah.
Then they're going to lean on you. They're going to buy into you as a leader and follow you as a result. And so for me, that's just it. It's building those relationships. It's making sure that they're not just buying into what you're trying to sell them from a professional standpoint, but they're buying into you as a person.
Yeah.
And you have to put yourself out there for them to do that. And sometimes they won't. Sometimes you're going to put yourself out there and they're going to be like, you know what? I hear you, but you're just not the type of person that I want to buy into. That's fine. But at least they're making that choice based on the real you and what you're and the path that you're and the vision that you put in front of them. And that's perfectly fine. I have a lot of relationships with individuals over the years that, quite frankly, I've had to terminate for different reasons.
Yeah.
I've had to, we've had to go our separate ways professionally for reasons that, I would rather not have played out the way that they did, but we're still friends, but we're still connected, but we still talk because they know I care about them as a person. It wasn't a personal decision.
Yeah.
And that's just it, is when you can separate the two, when people know, okay, I might not agree with the decision this person's making today, or what they told me in my review, or, or where we're going on this project, but I respect the person and I respect where they're coming from.
Yeah.
I think that's crucial when you're trying to guide them through those difficult times and those challenges that we all go through the course of our careers.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with it entirely. Well, my experience in corporate America, it was shocking to me, Don, because you saw me come out of the Marine Corps. And Marine Corps, and the military in general, Marine Corps is very leadership and development and training rich. They are obligated to, it's a training environment. There's always mentorship and things like that. So it was shocking to me to come out. Obviously, my first job at K-Force was director of leadership development. Dave Dunkel wanted to start a leadership development program. I was shocked to find out that in corporate America, almost nobody gets leadership training. It's definitely a rarity. And if it happens, it's usually a leadership event, like sending them away to a seminar. And as you know, an event is not a program, and a program is not a strategy. And I have found that the vast majority of the companies, it's counterintuitive, Don. As goes the leadership, so goes the entire company. And the average company, almost all companies, spend millions of dollars on capitalization equipment, warehouses, technology. And I ask them, what's your line item budget for leadership development? And it's usually like, zero, like it's just counterintuitive. And usually it's like, well, I didn't get any leadership training and look at me, I'm an executive. And of course, if you talk to their people, they're saying, yeah, well, let me tell you something. It's apparent he didn't get any training. Should have had it 30 years ago. So anyway, I'm philosophizing here. What I'm saying is true. What would you tell? Well, there's two facets to this. I'm going to ask you, what would you tell the younger folks, really 45 and younger, about leadership development, self-leadership, and that they get from their company, if they get it at all, and the importance of seeking it themselves and seeking out coaching, role models, mentors, just casting a wide net, because there's so much out there available that can help you develop as a leader. So I'm kind of rambling now, but I wanted to hear your thoughts, knowing what you know now, because I think you were one of those ones that had little formal training. I mean, by the time I was with you, you're obviously a good man and a good leader, but I don't think you had any formal where everybody sat you down and went through a program. So what's your thoughts on that? What's your advice to the younger folks?
It's a valid observation, Mike. Most senior leaders, I would argue, have gone through very limited leadership training. I have a little bit. I will say that I am now a little bit of an exception, and I'll explain that in a minute. But most organizations do not, especially here in the United States. In some other countries, I think it's a little more prevalent. And I say that from my experience with Randstad.
Yeah.
But it's many leaders lack that training and have had to depend on experience significantly. Even when I went back and got my master's degree, I got my master's in management and organizational leadership. And a bit of my thinking at the time was around just what you were saying, and that is, if I want to develop in something, it's going to be, leadership. And how do I develop this leadership from a leadership perspective? But even then, in an academic environment, it was not as directly applicable to the professional corporate world as I would like it to have been.
Yeah.
As opposed to today, where the way I see it, there are organizations like yours that are very tailored to leadership skills in a corporate world. And there are also mentor programs that are very tailored to the individual. And quite frankly, you're not going to get that in an education environment.
Right.
Now, I will say when I was with Randstad, I went through a program that we called our Senior Executive Program.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that was a 12-month executive leadership program that was basically, co-hosted by two European educational institutions, one in the Netherlands and one in France, INSEAD and TS, and it was amazing, but it was an exception. And the only reason, and I say it's, and keep in mind that's a company that's based in the Netherlands, and they place a little bit different priority on training and leadership training there. But even so, that was 30 people a year in a company of 38,000 people. It's not like it's going to have the effect on the broader organization that you would like. So I agree with you. I think that it's something that is a gap today. It certainly, I think, is felt at every level of leadership, but especially, in my opinion, in middle level management.
Yeah, I agree.
Because you have your leaders, your managers that are basically at the line level, that are learning the basic principles of leadership. They're responsible for 5 people, 10 people, and a limited set of responsibility, and then they grow into the next level, and they have managers reporting to them. And their responsibility is growing much faster than their leadership skills at that place, typically speaking. And if they do not have a leader that is investing in them during that period of time, that's where, in my opinion, many leaders fail.
Yeah.
That's where the strong leaders differentiate themselves, and the ones that are going to struggle, that's where it becomes very apparent. But quite frankly, much of that can be avoided in my opinion, if they're getting the developmental investment that they need to really transition into, that more strategic leadership role. The reason I say that, some of that is because of, I think of this within the context of a technology professional, and when you move from that entry level management type of role to that next tier of management, you're moving from a tactical role where you're still day to day in the technology, and you're still able to perform. You're leading people, but you're still kind of doing the day to day technology as well. And then you have to make that decision of, okay, now I'm a full-time leader.
Yeah.
Now my job is to lead people. And that's where it can break down if you're not making that investment. So I think that it's crucial. I think that many leaders fail at that stage because of a lack of training and guidance, unfortunately.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I remember talking to you, I was aware of the Randstad thing, which seemed to be a great deal. Do you know, and I'm happy for that, do they have leadership training programs at the bottom level too? Entry level leader, mid-level managers?
It varies by country at Randstad. Different countries have different leadership programs for the different levels of leadership. In North America, we had, selectively, we had some leadership executive coaching that we would apply, use for not all executives, but some.
Yeah.
And we were selective about that. And then, quite frankly, then we had some training organizations that we were members of that provided some leadership classes that we made available to our employees.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. One point that I want to touch upon, I alluded to it earlier, is, best case scenario, Don, a company has a leadership development strategy and And hey, guess what, Susie? Good news. You're going to get promoted. You're going to be in a leadership role. And before you get there, or as soon as you get there, we're going to put you through this 5-week course or whatever to equip you with some fundamental leadership competencies and all of that. As we both have acknowledged that probably isn't going to happen for the vast majority of people. But it has to happen. The learning and development has to happen. And I say the leaders out there that aspire to become a good, effective leader, if not a world-class leader, they have to take ownership of their own leadership journey. Even if the company provides things for them, it's never going to be enough done. As you know, you're going to have to do your own. Mm-hmm. And I want to get your thoughts on that. So let's take the low road and say, and we've got a young guy or gal out there, mid-30s, wants to be an executive, getting no training whatsoever, works for good people, but they just don't see the need for it because it's kind of like a dysfunctional family. The executives never got it. Therefore, it doesn't even dawn on them to give it to the younger leaders. It's not there, and it's not ever going to be there. But the need for it is still prevalent. What advice do you give that young guy or gal? How do they take charge of their own leadership journey?
This goes back to what we were talking about before about leaders being made, so to speak, rather than born. It's just like a sport. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're not going to put in the work, mm-hmm. you're not going to get the results.
Yeah.
They don't just come naturally. It's if you want to be a professional basketball player and your tactic is going down to the court down at the park every day and shooting from the free throw line, you're going to be shooting a long time. Yeah. The same is true in leadership. I mean, you have to apply yourself. You have to invest the time, the energy into becoming what you want to be to reach your potential. It's not something that just happens on its own. So, like you said before, some people are going to have natural qualities that will help move them along a little faster than others, but nothing's going to be your ticket except for, experience and learning what you need to learn to move forward and to position yourself for achieving additional leadership goals in the future. And when I say that, leadership, when you're typically speaking in most organizations, when you are moving up the corporate ladder, especially most organizations are performance-based, and if you're a software developer, for instance, and you become a good software developer, you might become a senior software developer. You might become a lead even, or an architect. But there's a career progression that takes place. Once you get into leadership, you move into, typically speaking, you're moving into a leadership role because of an opportunity. Mm. An opportunity has made itself available, a leader is needed, and you have shown yourself with the capability of taking on those responsibilities. And so it's something that has to be earned and demonstrated so that when an opportunity does become available, you are there, you're at a place where people believe in you and your ability to take on those responsibilities. Yeah. You're not going to be able to prepare yourself for those opportunities if you have not done the work.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Well, taking a different tack, now that you're there, Don, I mean, you've been in senior leadership roles for quite a while now. CIO of Kforce, $1.3 billion company, CIO of Randstad North America, right? Which I think was about $4 billion. Then a privately held company, quite large. And then I believe EmployBridge is quite, so you're there. You're a senior executive by anybody's definition and doing well. A lot of people listening to this podcast, watching it on YouTube, they're like, man, I want to be like this guy. Forget Mike Etor. I want to be like Don Sloan, Now that you're there and you reached it, what advice would you give the 20-ish, 30-ish Don Sloan about how to better educate and prepare for the path that you've now traveled? What do you wish you would have done, wish you would have done earlier, better, more, whatever the case?
I guess two things come to mind. One, you got to have confidence. You have to believe in yourself. You can't expect others to believe in you if you don't believe in yourself.
Yeah.
When you are in a place where you need to influence others, they need to believe if they don't see that you believe in yourself, if they don't see that confidence in you, they're not going to buy in themselves. They're not going to believe if you don't believe.
Yeah.
One of the things that I often coach young leaders on is their willingness to put themselves out there, to basically make sure that their voice is heard, but it's heard in a constructive way. Because I think especially as young leaders, it's easy to sit in the back of the room, and raise your hand when called upon, or what have you, but not to really, put yourself out there. But to be honest with you, leadership is all about influence. It's all about causing others to change their behavior towards a common goal at the end of the day. To have influence, you have to be willing to make your presence known. It starts with confidence at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is, and this goes for some of the more senior leaders. One of the things that my CEO today, his name's Billy Milam, he has said on numerous occasions that I think encapsulates this well, is if you're a senior leader, the most important part of your title is the first part. And what he's talking about there is, if your title starts with chief, or your title starts with vice president, that's much more important than technology, finance, or what follows. Because as a senior leader, you have to be willing to go outside of your lane.
Yeah.
My role as an executive at Employee Bridge, first and foremost, is to be a part of the executive leadership team, and to make sure that we as a team are leading the enterprise effectively.
Yeah.
My role as the senior technologist in the organization is secondary to that. And so, until you learn to actually, when I say go outside your lane, influence outcomes outside of what your direct area of responsibility is defined as, until you're willing to spread your wings a little bit, you're going to be limited in the level of influence you have within the enterprise as a whole. And to me, that's where a number of senior leaders fail in regard to their ability to move up to that executive level in the organization.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, listen, Don, we're out of time, but I can't let you out of here without asking you the fantasy question I ask everybody in the podcast. If you could bring back one leader from the past, spend a day with that individual, who would it be and why that person?
You first said that, I was thinking the person I would bring back, but now I'm thinking the leader, and it's two different people for me. The leader that I would bring back this is maybe an unusual choice. I would bring back, I'd like to have a conversation with Abraham Lincoln, to be honest with you, for a number of reasons that a plethora that I can't go into. But the thing about him, to me, as a leader, I think is unusual. Going back to the made versus born, and you want to talk about someone that I think most historians would agree did not have natural leadership qualities.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Abraham Lincoln. I think most would also argue that he didn't necessarily want to even be president. And yet he led this country through what is arguably the most difficult time, and not only for the nation, but for the role he was in, and navigated it effectively, up until his death. And, without the qualities that we all would expect from, a typical inspiring, leadership figure, and so to me, I've always found that fascinating about him, and the role that he's played in our history. The one thing I would say, to anybody though that asks that question, is I would be prepared to be disappointed. and I say that because I think anytime when we think about our heroes, when we think about those people that, let's say we believe are maybe the best leaders of all time, we know what we know, but they're not perfect.
Yeah.
And I think we would often be surprised at how imperfect they were, and yet somehow managed to lead to be such great leaders. And so I'd say, whether it's the person that I put out there with Abraham Lincoln or whoever, I doubt there's very few people I think that I would actually choose, meet, talk to, and come out the other end and think, wow, yeah, they're perfect. I think what I would learn would be, wow, they had a lot of issues. They had a lot of struggles, and yet somehow managed to achieve what they achieved.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Two twists on that. When I was a Marine, I did well. And if I dare say so myself, I had a really good reputation. And they made me an instructor with all the brand new officers and all of that, some of whom you met, Doug Rich, Verge Palumbo, Brandon Lewis, and people like that. I recruited them to K-Force. And of course, they're very easily impressed at that. And at that age, that level, they see me and they hear about some accomplishments and they just think, oh my God, I want to be like this guy. This guy's the penultimate Marine. And I used to tell them, I appreciate it. I thank you. You're very impressionable right now. But Mike Etor's not what he used to be and never was. And they used to look at me and I said, listen, if I did half of the stuff that you folks think I did, or these rumors that are out there, I really would be something. I didn't. I've got warts. I've screwed things up, and trust me, I'm just a human. On the business side of it, at this age, Don, 66, I tell clients, some of them are overly impressed with my business resume. Like, wow, Mike, I Googled you. You really were a C-level guy in a publicly traded company. I saw what they paid you. You made a lot of money. I said, yes, that's true. And I said, the number one reason why you're going to pay me a lot of money for my services is I'm getting ready to tell you and help you make the colossal mistakes that I made as an executive. And they look at me, I said, oh, let me tell you, I made some doozies, And if I can help you just avoid one of those, I should charge you 10 times my fee. And that tells them, okay, there's no silver bullet out there,
No, there's not. You made me think of, honestly, of all things, you made me think of my kids at that point. I've got them all thinking that I am Superman at this point, but now I've got a couple of them that are adults, and they're not buying it anymore. So it's becoming a little bit more difficult to keep the lore, to keep the perspective out there with the younger ones. Like, Dad, Dad's not really Batman. Well,
the struggle is real, Don. The struggle is real.
That's right.
So, listen, at that, somebody wants to contact you. How do they find you? How do they reach out to you?
The best way to reach me is probably to reach me on LinkedIn. You can do a search out there. Don Sloan, obviously, Chief Digital Officer at EmployBridge.
Yeah.
Not hard to find.
Yeah. Well, listen, Don, thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on. And again, thank you publicly for all the help you ever laid on me at K-Force. You guys made me look good continuously for a long time, a lot of years, and I learned a lot from you. And so thank you for that. And selfishly, I would respectfully ask that you consider coming back on the podcast again sometime.
Thank you, Mike. And for what it's worth, I always tell folks that you typically learn the most from the people that are most difficult to work for. And I learned a lot from you, Mike, so I appreciate that.
Well, believe me, it was my pleasure, Don. And so let's leave it at that while we're still on speaking terms, okay? Thanks a lot, Don. Have a great day.
All right. Take care.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at fidelisleadership.com and sign up for our leadership newsletter. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient Greek philosopher Heracles.
What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but is woven in the lives of others.